Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the 100% Wild Podcast. I'm Mark Kenyon of Wired to Hunt. With me is Matt Drury, and today we have a special guest with us again, back on the show, Mark Drury. How are you guys?
Good.
Doing well. Can't complain.
You know, you say special guest, but when he's killing 217-inch deer, you got to have the guy on, right?
That's the truth. Congratulations, Mark.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate that very much. It was a fun day.
Oh my gosh. I cannot imagine between, I remember, it's funny, so many of us, follow your hunts through all the various things you guys do across media. So last year was so exciting to see you kill Bucktober, your first 200-inch buck. And then when I saw this happen, my excitement got lost now because now you're just spoiled. That's incredible. That's really incredible. Yeah. I'm excited to hear about the story, which I think we are going to talk about today, right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. We got a couple cool things regarding the story. Of course, Mark went live on Facebook after the recovery, and you've gone live again, kind of sharing some of the video and the pictures that you've captured regarding that buck. And over on the YouTube page where this podcast airs, we've put up a kind of a watch party that Mark had at his house. We edited together. That night, Mark had a bunch of people come up to his house and check watch the video, and Mark kind of goes through the story. And so we edited that together and put it up on DOD TV here on the Drury Outdoors YouTube channel. So we just put that up last night, actually. So it's pretty cool. So we're definitely diving into all things danger.
Understandably, it's a story worth telling, and I got to see that video actually this morning. It's funny, when I woke up this morning, I kind of paged through my phone and see what's new, and that video was one of the first things I saw. So I started watching it, and my wife came in at like 7 in the morning. She's like, "What are you watching?" I'm like, "Well, Mark killed a big buck
again."
Yeah. So that said, though, our listener submitted question today, kind of pairs really nicely into this story of danger. So I was thinking maybe we listen to that question, and then maybe, Mark, you can tell us that story and how it relates to this question that we're going to be answering.
You bet, man.
Works for me. The question of the day is brought to you by Cabela's, the world's foremost outfitter.
Hey, this is Tim in Columbus, Ohio. My question is, when you guys talk about patterning a buck, what exactly are you talking about to pattern a buck during the summertime? Thank you.
Now, I know he mentioned the summer, but I'm kind of hoping, Mark, you can kind of walk us through, any time of year, any time of the season. How do you go about this process of patterning a mature buck? And I don't know, maybe you want to lead with the story of Danger and how you put a pattern on him?
Sure, and it really, Danger always started in the summer for me because he was very much a homeboy on a particular 180-acre tract that I had. I literally lived there from when I first put the cameras out in mid-July all the way up through October the 15th through the 20th. It varied year to year. From the time he was 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, I had hundreds of pictures of him. And so in answer to Tim's question, it's about the information that you garner from your pictures when we talk about patterning a buck. In other words, we're trying to look for tendencies that buck gives you through the pictures that you're taking of him. And when I look at pictures, particularly summer pictures, I'm not necessarily as worried about the weather because I think weather affects them less during the summer when they're growing than once they go hard horn. But once they lose that velvet and you get closer to the season, especially when you're drifting back and looking at previous year's pictures, if you have those, then I'm looking at every single thing about that day. And I'll look at the picture, especially if it's a daylight. And most importantly, I look at what direction he's traveling. And generally, I put my cameras up in strategic locations to help me understand direction of travel. If it's of a morning and he's pre-dawn or just about dawn, he's probably heading to bed. So I note that and go, okay, he's probably bedding over here somewhere. Depending on the time of the picture, then, okay, how far could he have traveled before he went to bed? If it's of an evening, he's probably coming out of his bed, going towards food. So be mindful of the time of the day that the camera took the picture. In addition to that, I will go back and historically look at wind direction that day, wind speed that day, barometric pressure that day, temperature that day, where we were the previous 2 or 3 days on weather to see if it's in the middle of a front, the front end of a front, the tail end of a front. And I get that historical data off of a website called wonderground.com, WUNDERGROUND.com. And there is an almanac on there. You can go to history, plug up any day, any month, any year, and it will tell you all of that information. So I find this information very helpful to see what triggers make this particular deer move. And by and large, generally those triggers make most of the deer move. And in our case, or in the case of Danger, most of the bucks that we generally hone in on, we're looking at what triggers a mature deer to move. Year and a half, 2.5, 3.5 are just a little bit different. By the time that they get 4, 5, 6 years old, Danger was 5, you start to see a funneling effect of daylight activity going to nighttime activity, because the older they get, the slower they move, the lazier they are, and they just don't move during daylight very often, Tim. So you have to keep that in mind if you're patterning a buck that you have history with in previous years, and all of a sudden you're into the next season. Keep in mind he's 1 year older, and he's not going to necessarily do everything he did in previous years, but he might do some of those things when the weather's exactly right. So I'm monitoring all that, and I'm trying to put together a pattern. I'm looking for tendencies. I'm looking for where he's bedding on certain wind directions, certain wind speeds, because it is amazing how it will vary where a buck beds depending on the weather. And that's one of the things that I look closest at, you know. Granted, you got a daylight picture of him, but what beds he choosing that day, or what food source he choosing that day? Well, what was the weather doing that day, and how fast was that wind blowing? That's one of the factors that I look at most, is wind speed, wind direction, of course.
How do you go about actually organizing all this information? Because I feel like one of the challenges is, okay, if I'm trying to collect all this different data for this specific buck, and then you're taking these kind of lessons from each one of these things you see. Do you have any like journal you put together, or a chart where you map all this stuff out? Or, I don't know. Is there a way that you actually try to physically get all this stuff in one place so you can look at it and kind of see it holistically?
I don't. I mean, it's generally up here. Like I just, when I see it, then it's there and I don't forget it, particularly on a deer. You know, I mean, when I see a pattern and I see something that he triggered, I'm very forgetful. You can ask Matt. I can't remember my own name some days. But when it comes to deer, I think it's selective memory, my wife calls it. Like, I can remember that stuff, but I can't remember simple stuff like, phone numbers and zip codes and just stuff. But my mind's full of deer stuff. So I don't take notes, but I've got all my pictures in my Reconyx Buck View. So I will, when I get on a deer like Danger, I had a file on him last year already, and I take every picture that I've ever had of him that I feel like it's him, and I put them all in that particular file, and then I moved that file into my 2016 photos, and whenever I'd get a new one, I'd put him in there. So coupled with sightings when we go out, I'll note the weather, note what he's doing, and note what bed he came out of, and those types of things as well when we actually encounter him. And I think Danger, I remember encountering him twice at age 2.5. We encountered him twice at age 3.5. We encountered him 3 times at age 4.5. And then this year, that was the one time we encountered him. So, all total, we only saw the deer 8 times his whole life, but I have 700 pictures and probably 10 or so video clips of him.
It's amazing because, we talked about it off air. We were talking about a deer that I was chasing or am chasing, and I can't retain that information like you can. I have to look at it, sit it in front of me and actually look at it. And Mark Kenyon, are you kind of the same way? I feel like you may be. Like, it has to be in front of me.
Yeah, I try to either use, like we talked about, I've been using this one online tool called Deer Lab, or I just have a journal. Like right now I'm hunting this buck Holyfield, and so I've got all my photos uploaded online that I use to analyze, but then also for my sightings, I just have sort of a journal where, to Mark's point, I just have every time I've ever seen him, what the wind direction was, what the weather conditions were, where I think he was coming from and going to, and any other information like that. So now I've got a full page I've got 15, 20 sightings of this buck now. And at least I can look at it there versus trying to think back on every single one, because I'm not as good as Mark. I can't keep it all in my head.
Mark, you mentioned that you you're looking at where they're changing, like where they're sleeping at, where their bedroom's at. Do you think that, I mean, does that happen a lot where the deer are changing where they go to bed? Because I always, like at my lease, I always feel like they're in the one area. I don't have a lot of timber, so I feel like they're all bedded right here in this timber. But I wouldn't have necessarily thought they'd move depending on what the weather was doing. Do you find they move a lot?
They positively will. Your lease is probably smaller. I'm looking at, a couple thousand acres if you took all the ground up here, but specifically where he lived on 180 or so. That's where I got his pictures the most. And then he actually moved on me when we killed him, but on that 180 he would vary where he bedded, just based on time of the year, wind speed, wind direction, all that stuff. They definitely bed in different places, so you got to kind of be mindful of that.
So Mark, what was the pattern that you discovered that you ended up using to move in on him and kill him? Or what was that tendency or something?
Where he was bedding on those cold fronts. Like I was only getting him about 4 or 5 times throughout from September 21st through the day I killed him. I only had him like 6 or 7 times, but every one of those was going into this 15, 20 acre patch of brush that I've always overlooked. I just never paid attention to it. When we set the blind up, and you guys are going to go, that's impossible. But when we set the blind up, I made the statement to Wade. I go, this is the first time I've owned this farm 10 years, and this is the first time I've ever been inside this patch of brush. I just don't go there because it's in a situation that I'm constantly passing it by. It's one of those places you just overlook, and I'm going to the heart of the farm and going where I've had the best luck in years past, and I've just never hunted there. And but when we set that blind up, it was the first time I'd ever been there in the 10 years that I'd owned that particular tract. So I kept getting him. I got him coming from the south, heading north into that patch, and so it's a small patch, so I had to be careful about when I went around it. I waited for a south wind. I went and put a camera on the other end of it, 2 of them, and then waited for a south wind again. I 4 or 5 days later, and there were days where I was catching him on the south end coming in that he never went out that north end, at least based on what I could tell. And I had him going the other way in the evening a couple times, and I'm like, he's bedding in here right after these cold fronts. So that next cold front, first of all, during the warm front, I didn't have a stand in there, and the trees were all about as big around as my ankle. So we actually built a platform on skids so that we could put the blind on it further away from him. Then we put a muddy bull on it. We drug it in with the tractor, and I drug it into this grass patch and backed it into these trees. Well, in the trees, you can't see anywhere. It's so thick. The grass patch was 6 foot tall, so we mowed out an area that encompassed 2 or 3 trails that was going from cedar thicket to cedar thicket. And I thought, if he's going to cross through here, this way we can see him. So we mowed that down so we had a sight line. And behind the blind, we cut for 2 hours just to give us a sight line out to about 50 yards. And then we cut some upper limbs so I could see out into this big bottom field. And, the first morning that I had the right wind on that cold front, the 21st, we went in and got in it. And we killed him right there at 5 steps in that bedroom. So part of that was just good fortune, but part of it was an anticipation of the weather conditions, a deer moving during daylight, and 2, that he might be bedding in there during that particular cold front.
Mark, I know we have a fan question from Facebook that kind of relates to that topic of the grass from Zach Young, where he noticed in the video he saw a lot of switchgrass or a lot of tall brush. I mean, I'd like to know more if it's natural or if they manicured it. So basically you manicured it, but what's the benefit of doing that?
Well, the brush is natural. I always say you just can't create that. Mother Nature's the best at growing deer beds, and it always hurts me when I see a farmer dozing out a fence row or dozing out a brush patch, because there goes another bedroom. But those deer use those bedrooms. But the grass we actually planted there as part of a quail program through the FSA office. So even then, I hired it done, and I never went down there where that grass was. We burnt it a few times, but still I just never went in that little cove right there. It's only maybe that field might be 5 acres, and then the brush itself's maybe 12 to 15. So maybe it's 20 acres between the grass and all that. So quite a nice little bedroom for him.
I think the thing that that's the most notable here is just how aggressive you got. I mean, that's the one thing that I always find myself like too scared to make that kind of a move. So what is it, that history with the pictures that you're just like, all right, this is the move? I mean, where's the confidence come from? Because that feels like it's a pretty bold move to go into the bedroom and put a blind up and do all the cutting and the trimming and mow the paths and all that stuff.
Well, part of that was it's twofold there, Matt. Part of that was necessity, and part of that was fear. And the necessity was I wanted to get in there and try and kill him while he was there. And I was fearful that once October passed and he got on does, then there was no chance of patterning this buck and getting on him. October is the month to kill a really mature deer. Make no mistake about it. Everybody waits for the rut. But if you know of a deer and you know where he's at, October's the month to get him before he gets a girlfriend. Once they get girlfriends, man, I mean, expectation and the stuff we're talking specifically here about with Tim's question on patterning a buck. If you're going to take advantage of that patterning, you're going to do it in October, because once November gets here, there are no patterns. I always say expectation turns to hope once November hits the calendar. And as much as we analyze and the way we do our food plots, the way we hunt, we are much better when we can expect to kill a deer than when we hope to kill a deer. I mean, I felt like I had to get him killed during October, because once the rut came, history showed that he went MIA every year from middle of October through late November, through about Thanksgiving. Once he got back on the food, he'd come back to that home range. Now, that being said, he might have just went to that rut range earlier this year, because I lost him in his normal range September the 2nd. And just out of a hunch, I caught him over there where I killed him, which is three-quarter of a mile away. So that might have been his rut range. Maybe I was on it. I don't know. But I caught him over there, and I was like, well, you're here. I'm going to crash in on you. And frankly, I didn't care if I spooked him, because deep down inside, I was so ready for him where he always lived, because I had so much history. I'm like, if I bump him out of here, hopefully he goes back to where I have my plan laid out, man. I've been dreaming of this plan that we laid out with food plot, stands, access. We changed everything on that farm for that one specific deer, and he left it September 1st. So go figure. You feel like you have a pattern, and then they throw you a curveball, but that's the mystique of hunting whitetail deer.
Mark Kenyon, are you sitting here thinking what I'm thinking, like in your situation with Holyfield and my situation with Hook? I'm thinking I'm about to miss out on this pattern that I finally figured out here.
That's exactly what I'm thinking about, and it's challenging, because I've definitely been – I've kind of been thinking about the same thing. Like, I'm running out of time, and so I've been hitting it hard this week, and I've had 3 close encounters with Holyfield. I've hunted 4 times. I've seen him 3 of those 4 times, and I just, because of property lines, I just can't get into there where I really need to be to get an arrow in him, and now I'm just kind of hoping that he makes a mistake and fouls a doe. The interesting thing is that I already have every single night, every time I've seen him, I saw him Monday night, Tuesday morning, Tuesday night, Thursday night. Every time I've seen him, he's been chasing does. So he's already running them around over here. So I don't know if that's going to change things up even more. So it's a challenge.
He's checking does.
Well, he's checking, but I mean, he's literally running around open fields, chasing a single doe all over the place.
That's how they check them. I mean, that's what they're doing. Like they're ready. Like the bucks right now are ready to explode. And because of that testosterone reaches a peak. The does aren't in yet, but the bucks do what they normally do, and they're going to check them, and that's how they check them. They'll run after them and check them and go through all their normal chasing and whatnot. But once they actually come in estrus, the chasing stuff stops, man. They stop checking every doe. But that's what they're doing, man. Their testosterone, they're ready to boil over right now. But they're checking those does, and that's how they check them.
On all my cameras in the last 6-7 days, it's been 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. where I'm seeing that happening. Like the most mature bucks I have are chasing these. I see, the does are flying through, and then here comes a buck behind them, and it's all in the middle of the night. I assume because it's been so warm out. Is that probably the case?
Positively, and we're also, in the dark of the moon phase. So that's my least favorite time of the calendar. The moon calendar is dark of the moon. I see less daylight activity during that phase than I do the 5 to 7 that precede and follow the full moon.
That's interesting you say that, because the deer hooked at him after all of the daylight pictures I got of him were that 5 days after the full moon. Well, the full moon
Yes.
and then the 5 days after. So
Yep.
it was exactly right. And then everything else since has been, middle of the night, checking scrapes or chasing does.
If you take the 4 or 5 days that lead into the full moon every month, afternoon hunting is a little bit better. If you take the 5 to 7 days after the full moon, morning hunting is often a little bit better. And those are some of those tendencies that we've looked at, through the years and seen. It's like, okay, as you hit the full moon, the week prior, afternoons are a little bit better. The week after, mornings are a touch better.
Hey, Mark, on that morning versus evening, I have one more fan question for this segment, where it says most guys don't hunt mornings in October, but why did Mark choose to hunt on this morning or any morning in October?
And that was, interestingly enough, from September the 15th through October the 21st, we've hunted every day, and that was the first morning we went and sat. And we decided to go, because the warm front had passed. It was a cold front on the 20th, and then the 21st, the wind was doing a switch. It was at 2 miles an hour. The pressure was 30.3, so I felt like if we were going to get in the middle of that bedroom, we needed high pressure. Number one, we crushed everything we had in our scent crusher closet to try and minimize our scent. I rewashed it, I crushed it, and we sprayed down, and we went in there, and we felt like we were as scent-free as two humans could possibly be, plus we had high pressure benefiting us. And I mean, we had the morning of all mornings. There were deer coming and going out of that bedroom. We saw 5 bucks, 3 were mature, and we saw 15 does, and I shot him at 9:30.
Wow.
Plus, you were in a muddy scent proof. So when did you open the window in that blind?
It was so quiet. It was so quiet. We hunted with them all of it.
Wow.
Or the ones we felt like the shots would be out of.
Wow.
Like Wade and I sat there back to back and didn't move like the whole morning. And I'd whisper to him, doe out here. He'd say, all right, doe crossing at 60. He'd give me the distances. And we literally did not move, Matt, because there was not a whisper of wind in that morning, and it was dead calm.
Those are the worst when there's nothing to cover, just the slightest, clothing, brushing up against other clothing or whatever. When
Everything.
It's that quiet, you're just
Everything.
like every little thing sounds like a huge, thunder bang or whatever.
It's tough to kill a deer on those mornings because you literally can't blink. You literally can't. Luckily, that 3.5 came in and made all that raucous with breaking the tree in half. And I told Wade, I said, if there's a mature deer around, he's going to be coming. And just after that, I heard steps. So we were able to stand up and get prepped and then saw him and then killed him right there. So
that 3.5.
We were lucky we had a warning.
That 3.5, we have that on that video on DoD TV right now, the watch party. We really go into detail of that, and it throwing up the limb over its back and all that stuff. Great footage.
He got his name that morning, Matt. We called him Dangerous Calling.
Cool. Very nice. He was
like
a nice
that.
deer, too. I mean, that's what, when I was watching the footage, I'm like, that deer is going to be a giant. What I first thought of was when you killed Skyscraper, and was it was Goliath that was
Correct.
I flashed back to that because I was thinking, well, you watch, this will be the next giant story they have in 2 or 3 years or whatever, because he looked like such a nice deer.
He looks to me like the Lone 10 looked at 3.5. Like he looks like a twin to him. Like
Yeah.
I'd be shocked if he doesn't have some genetics of the Lone 10 there, because that's
Wow.
same home range.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's the next storyline we get to follow a couple years from now.
Dangerous Calling, that's his name.
Nice.
Because he 100% called that deer, and there's no doubt in my mind.
So I have another question. Speaking of 200-inch bucks, your buck you killed last year, Bucktober, that was a November kill, right?
November
Was
the
that-
9th, yes.
Okay, so did you develop? I mean, did you have? Because I'm wondering, there is to some degree a way to pattern, or I guess it's a question. Is there some minute level of pattern you can do in November? For instance, do you see bucks showing back up on a property at some point in November every year when they start to rut or anything like that? I mean, how did that work with Bucktober?
Well, Bucktober, if you'll recall the story, the day before, Taylor and I were in there filming him that morning, and we saw him doe up that morning. Like he was alone, got with a doe, and then stuck to her like glue. And, I mean, my heart sank because we were on his bedroom, we were on his pattern, and I was like, we're done now for about 10 days. And I told her that. I said, he just locked up. We won't see him again. And luckily, it was the doe the next day. He's tending her there as he stands there and looks. She's down lower right in the frame. She's bedded. It was the doe that drug him by. So we went in with a hope, and we got lucky on Bucktober. Granted, we were still in his bedroom, but she drug him by. It wasn't us getting on his natural movement.
Okay.
But here again, you're being aggressive, and you're on top of where he's living, right?
Yeah, I had found that the previous year again on a hunch. I stuck a camera down in a draw, and I had Bucktober all over my farm. Never one daylight picture except in that draw, and every picture of him was daylight in that draw. And I was like, buddy, I just found your bed. And I when I looked at that card, I told Wade, I said, we're going to kill this deer next year.
Wow.
It's amazing.
How often do you move cameras around to try to pattern deer? Do you just have them stationed in the same places every year and wait for them to show up on scrapes or something like that? Or do you move throughout the season trying to pinpoint and narrow down where he's moving?
I have a tendency, I run a lot of cameras. Between here and Texas, I've got probably 70 cameras. And that sounds like a lot, but it's what we do. On Danger, I had 15 cameras on that one particular deer. So I'm trying to get every single bit of information I can accumulate. And in my mind, I'm thinking, if I don't kill him this year, I need this information for next year. So I wanted more information. In years past, like last year, I might have had 8 or 9 cameras on him trying to figure out what he was going to do for this year. But even with that many cameras, I only got him on like 3 of them the whole year. I got him in the summer on a couple, and then going in and out of bed, you see right there in the cedars, I got him on in and out of that bed. I got him on 3 of them.
Let me ask you, when you're putting your cameras on scrapes, do you feel like, is that a random, meaning I know some scrapes are hub scrapes and they come back to them every year, but do you feel like the pictures that you get on scrapes are more of a random nature? Like, are they checking them, from year to year at similar, times of day and that type of thing?
Yeah, I'm actually on to another buck right now, and I've got scrapes all over this farm. I got cameras on all of them, and I get him on one, and I get him there all the time. And I told Wade, I said, he's bedding right there. In fact, we stalked that deer 2 years ago, and unfortunately a doe caught us, but we were about to kill that deer. And he's a giant, 7.5-year-old, mainframe 9, 4 kickers, just a giant frame deer. He's like Chiquita, but a touch bigger, man. I mean, he's a monster.
Well, and
we found his bed.
Because I feel like on the lease I have that the bucks will check every scrape, no matter what part of the lease it's on. It feels like they go around, and at certain times they'll make their round and check all of them. And so it's like
that home range starts to expand, and a lot of that has to do with the age of the buck too. This deer that we're on now, like Danger got to be 5.5. His home range really shrunk. This deer we're on now, 7.5. And man, he's got a home range of about, from what I can tell, about 20 or 30 acres. That will expand here with time, but while he's in there, we've got a solid play on him. I think the 30th and 31st. I feel like those are the 2 days we might get an eyeball on him. We'll try anyway.
Interesting.
Why do you say that, Mark? Why are the 30th and the 31st?
Oh, that's the boiling point, right? Always pre-lock. If you want to go see a really mature deer, 6, 7 years old, catch a cold front the 30th or the 31st, and that's generally the magical days. And then you'll go through a bit of a November lull about the 1st through the 4th or 5th, and then the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, they'll start walking again for you.
Awesome. That's right about when I think my wife's going to have her baby.
There you go. Some things are more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you've talked about it a lot, Mark, but we did get a question on Facebook about the pre-lock reference. Can you give us just a quick scoop on what that means again, just for those that maybe haven't seen 13 or haven't heard you talk about that before?
Pre-lock to me is the boiling point of particularly the mature deer, and that's one of our tactics in that phase, is to focus in on the maturest and the biggest, most mature deer in the herd. And I don't know that the does are in estrus and they're actively breeding. However, I do think those first does that are going to come in about a week, like the 8th, 9th, or 10th, I think they're giving off a little bit of scent that those bucks recognize, and they will lock on them and stay with them all the way till it's actual breeding time. So, and I think the fact that you can focus in on those mature deer during this pre-lock phase is because they've already played this game. Back when they were 3 and 4 years old, they were doing the seeking phase and the buck parade and all that stuff. but by the time they get 5, 6, and 7, everything they do is a little bit ahead of everything else. A lot of it happens at night, but they will lock up before any other deer in the herd because nobody else will get around them. That's exactly what Danger was doing. He was in his bedroom. That 3-year-old walked in there. He was coming up there to kick his butt, and that 3-year-old left running away. He was scared to death. But that pre-lock phase, 30th, 31st, you watch. If we catch a little cold front, and I think we're getting one the 30th, there's going to be some mega giant shot in the Midwest. There always is. Those 2 days are just magical, and it's because those big bucks finally give it up during daylight, and there are very few days that they'll do that.
So what on that cold front on the 30th, what would you hone in on? You know, obviously you in the morning, what would you hone in on compared to the evening set? You know, obviously morning time near their bedroom, I assume, more of a timber type of a sit. And on evening, are you on green or what?
Well, here at daybreak, the wind is going to have speed to it. It's supposed to be 10 to 12 mile an hour. So we're very close to the front end of the front. So when I have wind speed of a morning, I have a tendency to try and slip in a little closer to the bed because I feel like I've got a little extra cover. And I suspect the movement will be at first light or shortly thereafter because you don't have that heavy high-pressure frost that puts them down, which delays the movement. So I'm going to try and sneak in that bed. I'm going to go in earlier than normal, but I'm going to be sitting there when it's first light because I think they'll move because I have wind speed at daybreak. That evening, I still have wind speed, but it's starting to die off. And there again, I may still sit that bedroom. It depends what I see that morning. I may go to food, I may not. I mean, I don't know. I want to see what the deer are doing by that time. But I know that morning with that wind speed, I'm going to sneak into that bedroom.
Would you push would you get aggressive enough to push or sit in the wrong wind direction on something like that, or no? Because the wind speed's so high.
Not with speed, because one thing about it, when you add speed to wind, that downwind direction is going to be tough to protect, even with the 30.1, which we're going to have. We'll crush everything and we'll minimize it, but even with crushing it through scent crusher, throwing up an ozonics, you're only going to fool about 70%. And I don't want him to be the 30% we don't fool.
Okay. Interesting.
I can tell your wheels are turning, Matt. You're thinking about hook.
yeah, for sure. I'm thinking this might be my last shot.
Uh-huh.
Are you guys doing this for the viewer, or is this selfishly for the 2 deer that you guys are after?
This is selfish.
Yes.
Hopefully the viewer's just getting something out of it.
Yeah. We need all the help we can get, Mark.
That's right.
Couldn't we have just had a conference call with us 3?
Maybe that's after this. Well, I don't know. Is there anything else, Mark, that we haven't covered when it comes to patterning mature bucks that we should talk about here?
The best way to pattern them is stay the heck away from them. That's one thing I didn't mention earlier is let your cameras do the work. Be smart about when you check them. And when you put a camera up, you better have a plan on how you're going to check it, on what wind and what weather condition. That's very, very important. You can't just go throw a camera up and go check it whenever you want. Like each one of my cameras for Danger were on the outskirts of where I felt like he was moving, and I would only go there on the appropriate wind and wind speed. I have a tendency not to sneak to a camera when wind doesn't have a speed to it. When it's windy, you can get by with murder. When it's calm, they hear you coming, and they're out of there, man.
Hey, speaking of that, I'm assuming to some degree you maybe use a vehicle like an ATV or a side-by-side or a truck to go in and check some of these cameras. Would you say that is a safer option than walking in there most of the time? Even though they can hear it, they're not as negatively influenced?
It depends where it's at. During the summer when you've got full foliage and full growth on all, I do a lot of my checking off the tractor because, man, I can mow all day, 20 miles, check every camera, and I never see a deer all day because they stay bedded tight. This time of the year, once you get into fall and leaves come off, you got to be really careful about where those cameras are. And I'll check them on my way into a stand or a way out because I'm going by there anyway. Or I wait always 11, 12, 1 o'clock, middle of the day. Make sure they're bedded tight and have a good wind speed in your face when you go check it. Get it and get out.
Okay. Good to know. Well, Matt, I think we've got our work cut out for us. We need to try to put this stuff into play in the next few days. Otherwise, we might be kicking ourselves.
Absolutely. So, we might be waiting until next year for the next shot.
Well, thank you, Mark, for the advice.
I'm one of those weird guys. I love September and October. I love December. I love November. And I absolutely, positively do not care for the rut. It is the toughest time, in my opinion, to kill a specific deer. You can go out and see a lot of deer, and you're liable to have a giant walk by that you didn't know of. But we are so into the chess match of trying to kill a particular deer. It gets tough once they get with those ladies, man. They get those girlfriends, and you just never know where they're going to go. I got lucky with Bucktober.
I think it's kind of two different mentalities, right? So if you're a
Yep.
weekend warrior or a guy that doesn't have a lot of time, the rut is your best chance to see something up on their feet and moving, right? But if you have the time and you're really into that chess match and go hunting a lot, you're right. It's probably the patterning that gets you going more so than the rut does.
No question. No question.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. This was super helpful for us personally, and I think for a lot of people, because I think more and more this type of hunting is gaining popularity, where you're trying to target a specific buck, you're trying to put a pattern on them, figure out, like you just said, that whole chess match is becoming. I mean, I think if you experience it once, it's quickly addicting. That whole process of trying to get to know these deer and try to find a way to intercept them. So this is great stuff. We appreciate it, Mark, and I think we should wrap this up real quick here, Matt. So just the one update from me would be to submit your question online through wiredtohunt.com/100%wild. We're getting some really good questions in here. We're trying to answer as many as we can, so be sure to send that in and subscribe to the audio version of this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of those other places. And of course, you can follow along with my hunt for Holyfield and all that stuff on the website and our social media platforms too. And Matt, you've got some updates, I'm sure?
Absolutely. So as you can always watch us over on the Drury Outdoors YouTube channel, you can watch this podcast or any other podcast. Check out this video, The Watch Party of Danger, on DOD TV there on YouTube. It's so cool. You get to see the footage of that 3-year-old. You get to see a little bit of the footage of Danger coming up, Mark's reaction. Very neat. So go check that out. We have a lot of original hunts that we're starting to put up. So every week we'll have a new original hunt and something that's never been seen anywhere before on TV, on our DVDs, or anything. So definitely tune into that. And as always, we're doing the live feeds over on Facebook on our Drury Outdoors page. Mark and Terry have been going every other phase and diving into what they're seeing, what the deer, how they're moving, what they're on. So the tactics, it's very cool. So check that out. And as always, follow everything we do at Instagram and Twitter and DruryOutdoors.com on the journal.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and good luck out hunting.
All right. Peace.
Thanks, guys.